In the latest episode of Rewriting History, we saw Rex White take his second consecutive championship and Ned Jarrett would lose his 1961 title. So today we will take a look at the 1962 season and how it would play out with a consistent points format. In 1962, we had 8 full-time drivers: Richard Petty, 2-time defending champion Rex White, Ned Jarrett, Jack Smith, Curtis Kreider, Joe Weatherly, Jim Pascal, and Herman Beam. In the opening 11 races, we had 4 full-time winners. Jack Smith won races at Concord and Savannah. Defending champion Rex White would win 3 races at Weaverville, Hillsboro, and Richmond. Joe Weatherly would win 3 races at Daytona, Concord, and Weaverville, and Ned Jarrett would win race 11 at Columbia. So after 12 races into the season, Joe Weatherly had the points lead over Jack Smith by 94 points. Over the course of the next 11 races, Joe Weatherly and Jack Smith would trade blows and win a few races in the process. But even through all this, the championship battle overall would tighten up, and Jack Smith was now just 15 points behind Joe Weatherly. At the World 600 in Charlotte, Weatherly finished the race in 2nd and Smith finished in 24th, and the gap was now 94 points. At Atlanta, Smith finished in 13th and Weatherly finished 18th, shrinking the gap to 84 points. At Winston-Salem, Weatherly finished in 5th and Smith finished in 10th, growing the gap to 105 points. At Augusta, Joe Weatherly would win and Smith finished 12th, growing the gap to 158 points. At Richmond, Weatherly finished 7th and Smith finished 8th, growing the gap to 162 points. At South Boston, Smith finished 2nd and Weatherly finished 7th, and shrunk the gap to 128 points. At Daytona, Smith finished 4th and Weatherly finished 23rd, shrinking the gap to 62 points. At Columbia, Weatherly finished 2nd and Smith 3rd, growing the gap to 67 points. At Asheville, Smith won the race and Weatherly finished 2nd, shrinking the gap to 52 points. At Greenville, Smith finished a solid 2nd, while Weatherly had a horrible day, finishing in 19th. And after 32 races, Smith had now taken the point lead away from Weatherly, and we now had a real championship fight. At Augusta, Joe Weatherly won the race while Smith finished 14th, and Weatherly took the lead back and now had a 37-point lead over Smith. At Savannah, Weatherly won again while Smith finished 18th, and the gap was now 108 points. At Myrtle Beach, Weatherly finished 2nd and Smith finished 3rd, extending the gap to 113 points. At Bristol, Weatherly finished 6th while Smith finished 21st, and the gap was now 163 points. At Ringgold, Weatherly won while Smith finished 10th, growing the gap to 209 points. At Nashville, Weatherly finished 4th and Smith finished 18th, growing the gap to 260 points. At Huntsville, Smith finished 7th and Weatherly finished 8th, slightly shrinking the gap to 256 points. At Weaverville, Weatherly finished 2nd while Smith finished in 5th, growing the gap to 266 points. At Roanoke, Weatherly and Smith finished 2nd and 5th again, growing the gap to 276 points. At Winston-Salem, Smith finished 2nd and Weatherly finished 3rd. And now, with 11 races to go, it would take a miracle for Jack Smith to catch Joe Weatherly. At Spartanburg, Weatherly finished 2nd while Smith finished in 3rd, and the gap was now 276 points. At Valdosta, Weatherly finished 2nd while Smith finished 11th, and Smith would slip back to 3rd, 311 points behind. With this result, Richard Petty would move into 2nd. He is now 297 points behind Weatherly. At Darlington, Petty finished 5th while Weatherly finished 10th, closing the gap to 262 points. At Hickory, Weatherly finished 5th and Petty finished 10th, and the gap was now 287 points. At Richmond, Weatherly won the race while Petty finished 4th, and the gap grew to 307 points. At Moyock, Weatherly finished 2nd and Petty finished 11th, growing the gap to 347 points. At Augusta, Petty finished 2nd while Weatherly finished 3rd, closing the gap to 342 points. At Martinsville, Petty finished 2nd and Weatherly finished 5th, closing the gap to 332 points. At North Wilkesboro, Petty would win while Weatherly finished 3rd, and with this finish, It would be good enough for Joe Weatherly to lock up the championship 2 races early over Richard Petty. 1962, Joe Weatherly would hold the point lead for all but 1 race, and once he took it back, he would just run away with it, and despite a late charge from Richard Petty, Joe Weatherly would keep his cool and walk away with his first Cup Series championship. Well, that'll do it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week for 1963.